When I first started teaching, there was this unspoken rule that in order to be a good teacher your first year, you had to burn out. That this was the norm and to just expect it, and it was a survival of the fittest, and the good teachers are going to push through and make it to the end. Well, I'm here to tell you that they are wrong. Today's content, we're going to be talking about why it doesn't have to be normal to reach teacher burnout in your first year of teaching. We're going to talk about what I wish people would have told me before I reached burnout during my first couple of years of teaching and how to get out of it if you find yourself there. So, with that being said, let's dive in.
Hey, teacher bestie. My name's Helena, and I'm the creator of the Present Teacher Podcast. I'm a first-year teacher coach, and in this podcast, you are going to learn everything from simple, actionable classroom management, social emotional learning, and teacher wellness strategies. You know that impact you want to make in the classroom? Well, we're going to make it happen here.
So before we dive into all the different aspects of burnout, first I want to tell you a little bit about my story and teacher burnout. So during my first year of teaching, I remember walking into my classroom for the first time, keys in hand, boxes in hand, super excited. And I thought that this was going to be the easy part. I had just finished a 10-month intensive program for my master's in education. I had done student teaching full time while working, 4 to 10 at, in customer service, plus taking classes at night. And I figured surely this is going to be the easy part because I've gotten through the hardest part, which was the program. And boy, was I wrong. So during those first couple of weeks, I was often the first car there. I was the last to leave. I would show up and I would plan and prep the day of. I would typically try to rush to the printer before anyone else got there. And I would plan, prep the day of, and then it wouldn't be until 6 p.m. each night that I would go home. And if you were to look at my to-do list at the time, it was a very repetitive list where I would do the same task every single day. And I felt like no matter how hard I worked, I would just have to repeat the cycle over and over again, like a never-ending hamster wheel. And so at this time, no one had told me there was another way and that this was just the normal way to do it. But along the way, I've actually learned different systems that can really help you manage your time and prevent teacher burnout from happening in the first place. By that December, I honestly felt like I got hit by a bus during break. I was so sick, so tired. And by the end of that first year in May, when my students were graduating, my little kindergartners, I felt like I had failed them. I felt like I had failed them as a teacher and I had failed myself because this was something I had looked forward to since I was a little girl. And I remember, praying a prayer at that time and just thinking, man, if there's a way to make teaching easier, please show me. And if there is, I'm gonna stay and I'm gonna help other teachers make teaching easier. And if it's not, then I can give it a solid one more year, one final try. And if it's not cut out for me, it's not cut out for me. And as I said, I'm happy to report I found an easier way to go about things, and here I am sharing all the systems and strategies I found online or that I have found online for my community, and that's where we are. So, like I said, no one had told me there was an easier way at this point, so that's what I'm doing now is I'm getting raw and real and sharing with you how to make it easier so you have that balance and you're not reaching burnout. So now that we talked about my story, let's talk about the 3 signs of silent burnout that no one talks about. And it might be creeping up on you. And I didn't realize that I was burned out until I was very deep into it. There's typically these quiet signs that kind of sneak up on you that seem common and seem normal, but they're actually a really big indicator that you're reaching burnout. So the first one is emotional fatigue. So at this point, I remember just feeling like I cannot handle someone else asking me for something. I'm just done. I have nothing else to give. I have nothing else to give anyone else. And of course, at the time, I felt like, who cares if I have nothing to give myself? I'd much rather give it to other people. But it's just that feeling of not having anything more to give, not only to yourself, but to your family, to your friends, or to yourself. And then oftentimes what this will look like in a physical aspect of emotional fatigue is I would disassociate. So I actually had a social media post go viral of me kind of mimicking this, but just kind of staring off into space when you get home and just mentally checking out and emotionally checking out and just kind of like you're done. You have nothing else. There's no capacity for a conversation. And this is often what my after school days would look like. I would drive home and I would just sit in my driveway in my car for who knows how long, just spacing out because I was so exhausted. I just couldn't think straight. I emotionally had nothing else and I needed that time to just kind of recharge before I went on to the next thing. So that's another sign of emotional fatigue. So the second sign of silent burnout that no one really talks about is getting sick constantly. Now, I know that when you're a first year teacher, you're often told that you're going to get sick a lot. And it's true to a point, to a degree. You're more susceptible to getting sick because you're being exposed to a large body of germs that you otherwise wouldn't be. And so it's very easy for you to pick up some sickness. But as I've gone through my own naturopathic health healing nutrition side, I've realized now just how much cortisol can impact whether or not you get sick or not. And honestly, your body can go into fight or flight for so long that you're just drowning in cortisol, and that's gonna put your immunity or your immune system down and put you more susceptible to getting sick. So when your stress is high, and you're burned out, you're more susceptible to getting sick. So while yes, on average, your first couple of years you may get sick more than the average teacher or the veteran teacher, it's going to be even more apparent for you because you're so stressed out and so burned out that now your immune system doesn't have the capacity to fight off what it normally would, and so you're going to get sick more easily. The third sign of silent burnout is a lack of interest in anything else. As I mentioned earlier, when I would get home, I'd space out. I had no energy for anything. Things that I used to love, no longer bothered with things like reading for pleasure, hanging out with family or friends, going out for a walk, sports, activities, all these things that I used to enjoy. I really didn't enjoy that. I was really in survival mode. And so just the idea of doing anything for myself at that point was just beyond anything I could comprehend. And so what I ended up doing is I would stay home most of the time and just kind of space out, veg out, space out, I had no capacity for anything else. And that's what it looked like. So, as a recap, the three silent signs of burnout that you may not notice are emotional fatigue, getting sick constantly, and lack of interest in anything else. So, let's talk about the turning point. So, as I mentioned, my story, and then there were those three signs of burnout. At the end of that first year, I realized that my worth as a teacher wasn't measured by how hard I worked, but how deep of an impact I made with my students. I realized I had spent that entire year chasing this endless to-do list, and every single day I felt defeated because I was chasing a to-do list. I wasn't chasing or being the teacher that made an impact. My priorities were not aligned. I was prioritizing a to-do list. I wasn't prioritizing being there for my students and making an impact. So I started to pivot. I started to focus on systems and I started focusing on being mindful. That's where the present teacher name came from, is being present in the moment, because I realized then how important it is to be mindful in the moment in order to make an impact for your students. So I focused on those systems. I learned there was another way to go about um, getting things done so it wasn't so draining. It actually felt easy. And that took a huge mental shift as I went from a teacher who struggled to plan and prep and do all the things to now as a teacher who was planned and prepped ahead. And I honestly felt guilty for a little bit because who am I to find an easier way when so many teachers out there are struggling with balancing it all? And it really took an identity shift in recognizing that I'm worthy because I am, and teaching gets to be easy because it does, and I get to be good at teaching, and that means it gets to be easy and fun, and that's how it's supposed to be. It was never intended for something that we have to suffer through. And so once I learned there was another way, I've gone forward with the systems and I've added throughout the years, I've perfected them, and I've never really looked back. And so the whole mission or the message behind this story is you don't have to burn out to be a good teacher. Your worth as a teacher, despite what society might tell you, isn't measured by how much work you get done. I remember the first time a teacher had told me this. She was I'm gonna actually read chapter one from my upcoming book, but I had another teacher who was judging a teacher for leaving at contract time and how she clearly didn't care about her students like we did. And that really stuck with me and it showed me that, oh, in order to be liked by other teachers, I have to work hard. I have to earn my keep. And I went that path my first year and I really burned out. And I got to the point where I was contemplating that teaching again. I got to the point where I questioned whether I was worthy to be a teacher. I got to the point where I thought, there are better teachers out there for my kids. Why am I wasting their time and wasting their year? And so I learned and I've used those systems, and you don't have to be using that identity of working hard and hustle culture in order to be a good teacher. You get to decide what a good teacher means to you. And there's another way to go about it. And there are other first year teachers that I have coached that have completely avoided burnout their first couple of years. If anything, they said that sometimes their first year is the best year ever because it's so new and it's just like you've worked so hard and build up to this moment, you finally get there and it just feels like a relief and like this is exactly where you're meant to be and you're doing exactly what you're meant to do. So I know it's easy to see online so many teachers talking about how they're burned out and leaving their first year, but that doesn't have to be your story. It was for me, but if you continue to learn from those of us that have gone before you and learned the hard way, you can honestly avoid a lot of the mistakes we have made. And so, like I said, many of the teachers I worked with, they've completely avoided burnout, and I know it's possible for you too. Now, I want to do something a little special for those of you that are joining me in this week's content, and I've actually been writing a book. I'm not releasing the title yet, but it's due to be released. I'm in touch with my editor. I'm hiring somebody to create the cover. It's coming together, and I'm so incredibly excited. But I came up with a book that walks through the systems and the strategies I used to get out of burnout and the same strategies I've used to coach other teachers around the world on how to prevent burnout and what those strategies look like. And so this is going to be chapter one of the book. I'm going to, as a special thank you for being a part of my community, I'm going to actually read to you the first chapter and give you a sneak peek of the book. So I'm so incredibly excited to be able to do this. No one else apart from my community has had access to any of the book so far. So I'm really excited to share this with you and to hear what you think. So if you are listening and you really enjoy this chapter, I'd really appreciate if you could leave a comment or send me a message on what you think about it. And so without further ado, I'm going to read chapter one to my book coming out for new and first year teachers. So here it is. Chapter one, A Rocky Start. For as long as I can remember, I knew I was different. I had just gotten home from school after a very tiring day as a first grader when my mom and father handed me a book. I struggled to set the book down on the shag carpet with a large thud. I looked at the cover. Upon inspection, I immediately recognized it as one of my mother's nursing books. She was in the middle of earning her degree to become an LPN. I looked up at my parents, confused about what they expected me to do with a book bigger than my head. Read it, my father urged, as he sat down next to me on the floor and opened to a random chapter in the medical textbook. I peered down at the chapter he had chosen to challenge me with. Mystified, but determined to never turn down a challenge, I sat there in the living room of our small two-bedroom apartment and started to look at the diagrams on the page. To this day, I can still see the diagram of an eye pointing to the iris and the pupil. All right, I thought to myself, you know this part is about an eye, so just sound out the words and do your best. So there I sat at the age of 6 reading a medical textbook about the human eye. After reading a paragraph, I looked up timidly, unsure if I'd pronounced everything right. They peered back at me, urging me to continue. So for the next 10 minutes, I sat there reading out loud from the medical textbook, talking about cones and rods in the eye, how they help you see color, and how vision is different at night. To say my parents were shocked would be an understatement. They were in such disbelief that my father even quizzed me on what I had read. Needless to say, I answered each question with 100% accuracy. It was in that moment I knew that I was different. Growing up, I was considered that girl. I was that girl who was always reading, that girl who barely talked, that girl who could barely answer questions in class without crying, and that girl who always tripped and bumped into things. I would literally shake when I had to walk across the classroom to turn in assignments in at the front of the class. So it was my goal to blend in as much as I could. The problem was I couldn't fool the teachers. Unlike Hermione Granger, my teachers would ask my class a question and there would be a very long pause. A very, very, very long one. And it was under this awkward pressure that, like clockwork, my hand, full of dread, would slowly raise to answer the question. I would answer correctly and awkwardly sit there shaking for the next 5 minutes because everyone was looking at me. I prayed no one would notice. This is when I learned I hated school. There's just one problem. I loved teaching. It's no surprise then that during high school, I graduated with 2 years of college already completed. At age 20, I graduated with my bachelor's in education with a minor in ESL and Spanish. Still not convinced districts would hire me such a young age, I went on to enroll into a 10-month intensive master's program in education. This is when things started to fall apart. It was the week before Christmas in 2017. I was in the middle of packing up my dorm room to put in a storage shed. I had received a scholarship to teach abroad in Sayulita, Mexico, for the rest of my master's program. I had my suitcase out, packed and ready to go, when I got a call from my dad. He let me know that he was going to be in town and wondered if I would grab lunch with him, but something was off. He sounded unlike himself. Concerned, I panicked and called my best friend Brandon for advice. He had texted me the night before, checking in on me since I had moved away to college. I let him know I was doing well and asked how he was doing. No response. Hours passed. Eventually, there was a knock on the door. When I opened it, my father stood there with tears in his eyes. Before I could ask him what's wrong, he whispered, "Brandon's dead. He killed himself earlier this morning." My knees instantly gave out and I started scream crying, the kind of cry only someone who's lost someone close can understand. Brandon was my best friend growing up. We went everywhere together. He was the closest thing I had to a brother. His parents moved around a lot. So, to stay in the same school district, he spent his childhood living with us. Our parents were best friends. When he was born, I carried him everywhere. I would tell his parents, my baby, when they asked to hold him. But for 16 years of my life, he was one of the few people who understood me. My boyfriend made his way to my apartment. After that, everything was a blur. I remember driving back to where Brandon lived and helping his family plan his funeral. I ended up canceling my trip to Sayulita and spending the next few weeks crying completely numb. As winter break started coming to a close, I had a decision to make. I had reached out to my college to let them know what had happened. They told me that I had a choice to make: finish the year out or pay $40,000 in tuition again and start over. I decided to keep going. The next few months were a horrendous blur. I moved in with my boyfriend Kyle and spent my days student teaching and taking classes at night for my master's. During this time, I wasn't doing so well. I was diagnosed with depression and anxiety. I wasn't okay, but I was doing it. 6 months later, I graduated with my master's in elementary education. To this day, I still thank the people who supported me during those hard times. I knew if it weren't for them, I wouldn't be where I was today. As the interview season approached, I started looking at moving to New Mexico where my mother lived. I had a list of 25 districts I wanted to apply to. After doing some research, I had my heart set on three of them, so I applied. Of those three districts, two of them called me back for an interview and demo lessons. I flew down for the interviews the next week, and both districts offered me a teaching position during the interviews. They both took a chance on me, and for that, I'm eternally grateful. I moved down to New Mexico with my boyfriend Kyle to start our new life together. We only had $1,000 to our name. That next week, I got the keys to my very first classroom. I still remember how proud I was unloading the boxes to that freshly steam cleaned classroom. I remember thinking to myself, if I can lose Brandon and still finish my master's program, then this should be easy. But boy, was I wrong. Little did I know that everything I'd overcome up until this point would pale in comparison to what my first year of teaching had in store. First year teaching. She was walking down the hall with nothing but her car keys, lunchbox, and jacket in hand. I checked my phone and it read 3:15 p.m., which was exactly the contract time. I peered across the hallway at the teacher with warm admiration. Since my first week of teaching, this teacher always left at contract time without a thing in hand. From the first day of teaching, I admired her. Not only did she have an impeccable work-life balance, but she was always on top of everything. She was always weeks ahead in planning and prepping, and had all of our required PD done the same day the email was sent out. Not only that, but the way she ran her classroom with such warmth and respect had me question everything I learned so far about good classroom management. How does she do it? I thought to myself. At that exact moment, the other kindergarten teacher came out from her room and watched her walk down the hallway to leave for the day. Wow, must be nice. Clearly, she doesn't care about her students like we do. She stated with a hint of annoyance in her voice. And there it was. That was the exact moment that I learned that to be liked and deemed a good teacher in today's world, you had to work hard. This is when I started to question if I really had what it took to be a teacher. By December 2018, I was completely burned out. I was numb emotionally, physically, and mentally. I remembered waking up on break in tears because I was so exhausted I felt like I couldn't get out of bed. By the end of the first year, I was done. I'd been the first car there, the last to leave, and I felt like my kids barely learned anything. At the end of May 2019, I watched my first group of kindergartners graduate, and as they held their little diplomas in hand, I started to tear up. Not because I was proud, but because I felt like I had been a complete failure. I'd failed my kids, I'd failed myself, I'd failed Brandon. That's when I had my I'm done moment. I silently prayed, God, if I was meant to be a teacher, I need an easier way to do this. Help me do this, and I will stay in teaching. I will do this one more year. If it's not easier, I'm quitting next year. And I'm happy to say God heard me. Fast forward to the next year, and I was consistently coming home 10 minutes after contract time. I was planned and prepped for the next week. My grades were all done, and I had already printed out the weekly newsletter for families. I wrote this book to you as someone who hasn't stayed after contract time in years. My district has asked me to train teachers in my district on classroom management, and I currently have a community of thousands of teachers that I show how to make teaching easier. I made it, so now it's your turn, which is why I wrote this book. In this book, I promise to do the following things. I promise to share it all, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I promise to share personal stories from my life. But mostly, I promise to show you the how. I promise to share which strategies worked for me and which ones didn't. I promise to show you how you can do it too. And most importantly, I promise to be my authentic self. No more hiding as that girl. I'm ready to show you how I became that new teacher next door. I promise not to hide who I am anymore or my truth, because one thing is true. As soon as I found my way to an easier teacher life, I vowed to spend the rest of my life helping new teachers around the world find their path too. And that's exactly what this book is. There's a saying I always end my content with, we are stronger together. Through this book, my hope for you is that you take what inspires you, run with it, and throw away the rest. Not because you should do it or you're expected to do things my way, but because you find inspiration to what you want to do. You only listen to what lights you up and ignore the shits and supposed tos. One of my mentors, Amanda Francis, taught me this life-changing concept. Our desires are safe guidance, meaning the things we want to do are God's way or the universe's way of showing us what the next right step might be. And those things that we feel like we should do or have to do are out of alignment. So here's my piece of advice. As you move through this book, I'm going to share a lot of practical steps I took to get where I'm at. I invite you to take action on the strategies that feel like a breath of fresh air. Wouldn't it be cool if I did it this way moment. Most of all, if you find something that doesn't resonate with you, leave it and continue on. The mission of this book is to show you what's possible, not to tell you how you have to do things. There are a million ways to get somewhere. My goal is to help you unlock the right path for you. So that being said, let's get started on finding your own path and becoming that teacher next door. So that wraps up everything about teacher burnout. So as a recap, we have first, I shared my story about teacher burnout. Then we shared the 3 silent signs of burnout no one talks about. I told you about my turning point in my teaching journey. And then I give you a preview of chapter 1 of my upcoming book. Throughout the time, I showed you that there's another way other than reaching burnout your first year of teaching. Thank you so much for joining me. If you found this week's content helpful, I would really appreciate if you could like and subscribe or send me a DM letting me know what your favorite thing about this week's content was. If you want to get notified when the book comes out, make sure to check out the link in the description where I'm going to be putting the waitlist to the whole book so you get notified first when it is released. If you want all my resources or my tips on how to maximize your prep, make sure to check out my free prep guide. In it, I answer the top 10 questions I get in regards to maximizing your time as a teacher. And if you want to take it a step further and you want me to show you behind the scenes strategies that I'm using in my classroom, you want templates, challenges, checklists, everything from a step-by-step standpoint on how you can implement strategies in your classroom to consistently leave on time and make teaching easier, make sure to check out the Present Teacher Circle. That's my program where I show everything from classroom management all the way to planning and prepping so that way you can be in advance or planned and prepped in advance. Thank you so much for joining me. As always, remember we are stronger together, and I'll see you in the next one, Teacher Bestie. Bye!
Thank you so much for joining me on today's episode. I hope that you were able to take away some value that will help you thrive inside and out of the classroom. It would mean the world to me if you could take 5 seconds right now and leave a review on this podcast. And if you found this podcast especially helpful, make sure to take a screenshot of this episode right now and tag me on your socials to let me know you're listening. As always, remember that we are stronger together with all the love in the world. Helena, aka the President Teacher. See you next time, Teacher Bestie.